is up, boys? What is up?
In AI shoujo, players ended up ignoring the adult content and getting obsessed with the survival systems instead. The game is about surviving on a deserted island with an anime girl, but the side content was so good that it took over. Gathering had its own progression, fishing had detailed mechanics, and the building system let players fully shape and decorate their bases. Some players got so focused on building that they even locked the girl in a bunker because she kept getting in the way. In AI shoujo, players ended up ignoring the adult content and getting obsessed with the survival systems instead. The game is about surviving on a deserted island with an anime girl, but the side content was so good that it took over. Gathering had its own progression, fishing had detailed mechanics, and the building system let players fully shape and decorate their bases. Some players got so focused on building that they even locked the girl in a bunker because she kept getting in the way. In AI shoujo, players ended up ignoring the adult content and getting obsessed with the survival systems instead. The game is about surviving on a deserted island with an anime girl, but the side content was so good that it took over. Gathering had its own progression, fishing had detailed mechanics, and the building system let players fully shape and decorate their bases. Some players got so focused on building that they even locked the girl in a bunker because she kept getting in the way. In AI shoujo, players ended up ignoring the adult content and getting obsessed with the survival systems instead. The game is about surviving on a deserted island with an anime girl, but the side content was so good that it took over. Gathering had its own
Super mutants represent war's consequences.
Welcome to the first video in our coverage of the new Amazon series Invincible. Invincible is actually an incredible comic that I've had the pleasure of speed reading recently, and while I had read the early arcs of the series a number of times, I'm glad I finally dedicated myself to reading the whole thing. The main series ran for over 140 issues with a couple dozen tie-in issues, which you don't really need to know, but I wanted you to appreciate how many comics I read this week. Normally I would start a series like this with the actual main character of the show, Mark Grayson, aka Invincible, and that video is absolutely coming next, but I wanted to start off on a different note and talk about a character in the show and in the comics that is the most interesting to me. Now, maybe it's because I've always loved villains more than heroes, or maybe it's because I'm actually training to take over the world myself, but since starting reading the series, I have gravitated towards Omni-Man, and he's become one of my favorite characters in comics ever. Today's video is on the comic origins and a brief history of the most powerful hero, then villain, then hero, again, Nolan Grayson, the Omni-Man. Now, before we go any further, keep in mind that this video is going to contain the majority of the significant actions within the comics, so that means there is a good Issue 1 of Invincible. Nolan Grayson is the husband to Deborah Grayson and recognized as Justice League. And I'm not going to discuss the history of those members ever, and you'll learn why in a few seconds. Nolan Grayson is first and foremost an alien, a member of the Viltrumite race who came from the planet Viltrum. As Nolan's son Mark approaches his 18th birthday, Nolan plans to start training Mark, who's half Viltrumite and half Earthling. Nolan learned Mark's entire life about the Viltrumite people, a network race of beings who evolved to a form of Darwinism, i.e. only the strong survive. After years of breeding the strongest of the people, they go out into the stars and begin to defend the universe for other fledgling planets. Nolan was stationed on Earth, where he met Mark's mother and became Earth's greatest champion. We also learn that Viltrumites live to be thousands of years old, and that their speed and strength is some of, if not the highest known in the universe. Additionally, they get more powerful as they age, so it's fairly rare for a young Viltrumite to be stronger than a fully matured or even an elderly one. When Nolan's son Mark turns 18, his powers kick in and he starts to fight crime under the name Invincible, a name that's truly put to the test many times throughout the series. One of the earliest adventures of the two is repelling a Flaxan invasion, where Nolan ends up stranded in another dimension for months. The Flaxans go on to be a major recurring species throughout the series, and I will discuss them in far greater detail when I cover Robot. So, for those of you who have already seen the first episode, you already know the biggest twist of the early part of the series. Nolan is not exactly who he says he is. One day, the entire Guardians of the Globe team is summoned to their main base that he has to tell Mark the gruesome truth, that it was he who killed the Guardians of the Globe. Nolan then explains to Mark the truth about the Viltrumite people and their empire, and that Nolan's true purpose on Earth was to conquer it. The Viltrumites were not as benevolent as they claimed to be. They were bred to be the strongest beings in the universe after thousands of years of infighting, selective breeding, and eugenics. The Viltrumites expanded over time and began to conquer worlds, but soon found out that they really only needed one Viltrumite per planet. So they would go from planet to planet and offer a trade. A planet would allow themselves to be subjugated, and in exchange for that subjugation and a large chunk of their natural resources, the Viltrumites would protect them and provide them with their technology. If they refused, well, they'd be eradicated and the resources would be taken anyway. Nolan was stationed on Earth. He met Mark's mother, interbred with her, and assumed the guise of Nolan Grayson, author, husband, and superhero. However, now that Mark's powers had kicked in, he believed it was time for him to get back to his mission and the reason he was sent to Earth. Mark is obviously shocked to learn that his father is essentially asking him to take over the planet and rule it. Mark refuses, and he and Nolan fight, and the battle is absolutely brutal. Mark is drastically overpowered by Nolan. Nolan beats him nearly to death, but shockingly leaves Earth. He flies out into space, and Mark and the rest of the planet are left to wonder what will happen. Will Nolan return with more Viltrumites, or is that threat over? However, fortunately, Nolan does not return to the Viltrumite Empire. Instead, he goes to another planet
Ну, привет.
with insectoid beings on it, and he begins ruling that species. These beings have far shorter lifespans than Earthlings, nearing only 9 months at a time, and they typically elect the oldest person to be their leader. Nolan, being thousands of years old, is immediately elected leader, and he's known on their world as their greatest hero and a true man of benevolence. Nolan marries a woman here named Andressa and has a child. Eventually, he sends for Mark, who's brought to him under false pretenses. However, Nolan and Mark somewhat reconciled. Nolan tells Mark that his time on Earth in this new world had changed him. He does not want to be the conqueror that he was supposed to be. He asks Mark for help, as he's sure that the Viltrumites are on the way to his new planet. And Mark reluctantly agrees, but he's way too weak to fight pure-blood Viltrumites. 3 of these beings appear on the planet and begin searching for Nolan. Nolan commands Mark to take his wife and son to underground caves that were used to protect the entire species from massive lightning storms that occur once a generation. Mark tries, but he ends up having to outrun a Viltrumite who is way faster and stronger than him. Nolan and Mark do battle with the Viltrumites on this planet, but Mark is easily dispatched, as his powers have not yet begun to peak. But Nolan goes into full savage mode and brutally beats the crap out of the others. However, Nolan's spine is shattered by a strike from one of the Viltrumites he believed that he had disemboweled and killed. Nolan is taken captive and Mark is left to heal. In another shocking twist, one of the Viltrumites, Krieg, orders Mark, the new ambassador of the Viltrum Empire, to Earth and says he has 100 years to enslave the planet. Nolan is taken into custody to be executed for treason, but that would take some time, due to the fact that Viltrumites have this weird belief that the person being executed must be in perfect health before the execution can take place. Before the two are separated, Nolan also urges Mark read his books he wrote on Earth, as they offer clues for powerful weapons and allies that could help Mark take on the Viltrumites if they ever invade Earth properly. Mark remains on the planet Praxis and helps rebuild, something that would have taken generations without his help. Andressa orders Mark to take the son of Nolan and her Earth, which Mark complies with. Due to his mixed genetics, it's also stated that Mark's half-brother will age and learn at an incredibly fast rate, but will eventually slow down. Mark returns to Earth and brings his brother with him. He also asks his mother to raise the boy, and they pick the name Oliver for him. While in captivity, Nolan eventually meets Alan the alien, pretty much the GOAT, and another character we periodically focus. Alan will have his own video, but for the purposes of this one, all you really need to know is that Alan had fought Nolan and Mark in the past. Alan was a scout for the Coalition of Planets, charged with finding incredibly powerful beings who might help stand up to the Viltrumites. After a savage
Привет, брат.
encounter with other Viltrumites, Alan is rehabilitated and, much like a Saiyan, comes back way stronger than he was before. In fact, it's believed that he's even stronger than most Viltrumites at this point. Alan allows himself to become prisoner of the Viltrumites in order to find Nolan and understand what he knows about the species' weaknesses. The two communicate telepathically and over time become best friends. However, Nolan's spine had healed and the execution process begins when they attempt to beat Nolan to easily escapes his confines and helps Nolan break out of the ship and flee to the homeworld of the Coalition of Planets. Nolan begins plans to help them attack and take down the Viltrumites once and for all. Nolan also reveals another massive bombshell about the Viltrumite species. There are actually only 50 pureblood Viltrumites left. They were all wiped out by a virus called the Scourge virus, which was actually the reason that Nolan left in the first place, to go out and find a way to interbreed with other aliens and hopefully bring his species back from the brink of death. Anywho, Nolan helps the Coalition of Worlds prepare for what's known as the Viltrumite War. Nolan helps track down incredibly powerful allies and weaponry that are capable of hurting Viltrumites. Then Nolan returns home to enlist the help of Mark and his son Oliver, who now resembles a teenager due to his rapid aging. Collectively, Nolan, Mark, Oliver, Alan, and many others head back into space. It's also about this time that we're introduced to the
Здравствуйте, молодой человек.
Empire, Freddie Mercury, who had left Earth to... that's actually Grand Regent Thrag, the most powerful pureblood Viltrumite alive. Nolan is able to retrieve Mark and Oliver and rally them to the war cause, but the group is ambushed in space by Conquest, one of the most powerful and oldest Viltrumites, who was sent to hunt down and kill the group as penance for losing a battle to Mark on Earth, which I will cover in much greater detail in Mark's video. The team of Nolan, Mark, and Oliver fight 3 Viltrumites and kill all of them, including Conquest. However, their ship is destroyed and Mark is gravely wounded, far too wounded to attempt to be moved. They stay on a remote planet for months until Mark gets his strength back, and Nolan and Oliver spend that time bonding and getting to know each other, as Oliver had not really spent a lot of time with his father since he was born. When Mark is all healed up, they rejoin the war effort, which had been going on for months, with the remaining Viltrumites losing a number of planets due to the coordination of the Coalition and the collective might of their resources. After a failed attack on the Coalition homeworld by their leader, Thrag, the remaining Viltrumites flee to their home planet. A full-scale attack on planet Viltrum is launched. The forces arrive and the rest of the Viltrumites led by Thrag. During this final battle, they are able to successfully destroy the Viltrum homeworld. This launches Thrag into a bloodlusted state, which is horrible news because he is by far the most powerful member of the species. Nolan and Mark are both badly injured, and Nolan is disemboweled but left shockingly alive. Thrag and the others retreat, and the Coalition forces retrieve Mark and Nolan and nurse them back to health. Because of the fact that they just destroyed the Viltrum homeworld, Mark and Nolan believe that the remaining Viltrumites are probably on their way to Earth in order to destroy it. They rush back to the planet, expecting everything to be destroyed, but shockingly, when they get there, everything's fine. But Thrag and the remaining Viltrumites are there on Earth in hiding, and they plan to interbreed with the human race to replenish their numbers. He presents Nolan and Mark with an option. Either let them live there, since they, destroyed their planet, and let them breed with the Earthlings, or they can continue to do their battle on Earth, and more than likely, everybody on the planet will die. Reluctantly, Mark agrees, and the Viltrumite war ends in a truce. While on Earth, Nolan is able to reconcile with Deb, and the two travel to the homeworld of the Coalition of Planets, where they live for a period of time. It is not long after this that Alan, now the leader of the Coalition of Worlds, informs Nolan that he has in his possession a new, stronger version of the Scourge virus, and plans to unleash it on the Viltrumites living on Earth out of fear that they would replenish their numbers. Nolan and Alan fight, as Nolan believes that if given enough time on Earth, the Viltrumites will become enlightened like he has, and killing them kills off his entire race. Oliver helps his dad fight Alan, but it quickly becomes evident that they don't have the firepower to take Alan down. The big fear here is that due to the genetic makeup of humans, if the Scourge virus is released on Earth, it will kill humans and Viltrumites alike. Alan is able to sway Oliver to his side, and together they defeat Nolan, escapes, and tells his wife everyone gets real shook because he is a brick shithouse, and basically everyone backs down, except Oliver, who tries to unleash the virus on the planet and kill everybody, but the only person who actually ends up infecting is his brother Mark. Thankfully, though, Mark doesn't die. He just loses his powers for a short period of time. During Mark's Mark's time spent in quarantine, the Viltrumites study his DNA, and Throg learns that both Nolan and Mark are the long-lost descendants of their long-deceased supreme ruler, Lord Argon. Nolan is placed in prison again, this time by the Coalition of Planets and Alan, but his charges are dropped after Alan and Oliver see the error in their ways. Despite the truce between the Viltrumites and the Coalition of Worlds, Thrag again attacks Nolan after learning the truth that Nolan is actually the descendant of their planet's undead leader. Thrag is desperate to keep control of the species and believes that Nolan is too weak to lead the Viltrumites back on the verge of extinction. However, Nolan is rescued by the rest of the Viltrumites. The important part here is that when Mark returns, 5 years had passed. So 5 years passed, a bunch of junk happens that we don't really know about. During that 5-year gap, Nolan has grown to become a very strong Thrag's children surrender when they realize that Thrag doesn't really care about them. He just wants revenge on Mark and Nolan for taking something that he thought was his. They decide to side with Invincible and Nolan, and the final battle takes place between Mark and Thrag on the surface of the sun. After an insanely violent battle, Mark is able to defeat Thrag, throwing his body into the sun. When Mark recuperates from battle, he speaks to his father one last time. Nolan, on his deathbed, declares Mark to be the leader of the Viltrumites, and reminds Mark that he will be their greatest leader. After all, he changed everyone, even Nolan. Nolan dies of his injuries, but the series doesn't end here. It does for Nolan. I know that was a lot of info, but man, Nolan has the best arc of any character in my opinion. I'm really glad I read this comic series, and I think his redemption arc is one of the best in the history of comic books. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I know it was very long, but I hope you learned a lot about Nolan Grayson, the Omni-Man. And if you did, consider subscribing and dropping a like and comment. This has been Nick with Key Issues, and remember the motto, Omni-Man over everything. Is finally out on Amazon, and we here at Key Issues are continuing our coverage of the show's main cast. This is the second episode, so if you missed the first on Omni-Man, feel free to check it out now. Invincible is a massive series that ran for over 144 issues, and it spawned an entire universe of characters. Today's video is going to cover the character which the series is named after, Mark Grayson, Invincible himself. Now, before we begin, it is important to note that much like The Boys, this is not a series for younger readers or viewers. The series is primarily aimed at adults. It's ultra-violent and deals with a wide variety of topics like war, death, and sexual assault. Additionally, due to the length of the series and the fact that Mark's in like every single issue almost, we won't be covering everything that happens, instead only the most important elements of Mark's story. And lastly, in terms of the way this video is presented, everything won't always be chronological, and you may need to check out other videos in order to get the full scope of what's going on. But that's just because I didn't want this video to be 5 hours long. So that being said, let's get started. Mark Grayson's first comic book appearance is in, you guessed it, Invincible #1. Mark Grayson is a typical high school student at Reginald L. Johnson High School. Fun Easter egg, you might actually remember Reginald L. Johnson if you're old enough from characters Winslow on the sitcom Family Matters, and LAPD Sergeant Al Powell in the first two Die Hard movies. Did I say that Mark was typical? Yeah, you might want to actually scratch that, because Mark has known from a young age that his father, Omni-Man, is one of the most powerful superheroes on Earth. When Mark was a young boy, his father tells him that he's an alien and that he belongs to a race known as the Viltrumites, a benevolent race of aliens who are incredibly powerful and go from planet to planet offering protection for less developed species. Mark's father, Nolan, also informs Mark that eventually, when Mark gets older, he'll begin to develop powers like his father: super strength, speed, invulnerability, and flight. During his senior year of high school, Mark's powers finally start to kick in, and he also starts thinking about girls and getting hair in places that there weren't hair before. You know the deal. After Mark's powers kick in, and along with help from his father and his father's tailor, Art Rosenbaum, he gets a costume and begins fighting crime. One day at school, Mark ends up standing up to a bully that's picking on another kid, and his principal tells him that it was very
Приветствую на нашей научной базе.
because Mark isn't invincible. Mark uses the conversation as inspiration and starts fighting crime under the name Invincible, a name that is put to the test many, many times in the comics. Mark meets up with local crime fighters, the Teen Team, composed of Adam Eve, Robot, Rexplode, and Duplicate, and he also learns that Eve attends his high school and they quickly bond over being heroes. Invincible's first few big battles serve to establish the supporting cast, like Mark's best friend William, his girlfriend Amber, and the stakes that go along with being a hero. For example, Mark helps repel a Flaxan alien invasion with his father, but his dad gets sucked into an alternate dimension and doesn't return for months. While Mark's father is away in an alternate dimension, Mark first meets Alan the Alien, a scout for the Coalition of Planets who, unbeknownst to him, has been going to the wrong planet for 15 years. Alan and Mark talk, and Mark quickly learns that not every problem needs to be a massive battle. However, in a massive, shocking twist move, the premier superhero team, the Guardians of the Globe, are killed by Omni-Man in secret. After the Guardians of the Globe are killed, Director of the Global Defense Agency, Cecil Stedman, appoints Robot the new leader. Robot forms a new Guardians of the Globe comprised of himself, Duplicate, Shrinking Ray, Monster Girl, Black Samson, and Rexplode. Mark is offered membership but declines. When one of the former Guardians of the Globe, Immortal, is brought back to life by the Mauler twins, he regenerates and starts to battle Omni-Man. You know, for killing him and the rest of the Guardians. I mean, I imagine I'd be upset too. And because of this battle, Mark ends up learning the horrible truth about his father and his father's goals on Earth. Mark confronts his father, and Nolan tells him the truth of their species and why he's on the planet. The Viltrumite race were not the benevolent people that Nolan claimed they were. In fact, they were a horrible, vicious race that conquers and subjugates planets, offering them protection in exchange for their obedience and natural resources. Nolan asks Mark to join him in his quest, as he was simply waiting on more cold and attempts to justify his actions to Mark, saying that they're thousands of years old and that everything in his life. Nolan taunts Mark, asking him is insignificant due to the longevity of Mark's own life. Nolan and Mark battle, with Nolan viciously beating Mark and leaving him for dead before shockingly leaving Mark together. Omni-Man pretty much ruins his entire Earth in an instant when he gets buildings and kills Mark. The entire thing is broadcast on TV. That Omni-Man is actually his father. Invincible is in a coma for 2 weeks before waking up and picking up the pieces of his family's fractured life. Multiple elements of Mark's life change during this time. His mom falls into a deep depression, Mark's best friend learns his identity, as does his girlfriend, and Invincible starts working for Cecil Stedman, who enlists Mark to help with planetary level threats. This working relationship with Cecil continues in some capacity through the series. Mark and Cecil often at odds over their approach to dealing with threats and villains. Invincible proves to be quite a hero, but learns that